The ache was a familiar tenant in my chest, a dull, persistent throb that had taken up residence somewhere behind my sternum years ago. It wasn't pain, not really. It was more like a hollowness, a space carved out by loneliness that had long since become a part of my anatomy. I lived with it, breathed around it, carried it onto the rugby pitch and into the lecture halls. It was the silent companion to a life lived on the periphery, a life defined by watching. And mostly, what I watched was Kian. Kian Cross, team captain, the sun around which our muddy, bruised planet of a team revolved. He was everything I was not, effortless, centered, loud in a way that drew people in instead of pushing them away. He moved with a kind of grounded certainty that I could only ever dream of. When he spoke, even in a crowded locker room thick with the steam and the scent of liniment, voices quieted. When he ran, the field seemed to rearrange itself for his benefit. He was the center of gravity, and I was just a stray satellite, caught in his orbit but always at a distance. My scholarship was my ticket to this world, a world I didn't quite fit into. I was quieter than the others, more inclined to have my nose in a book than to be shotgunning a beer. I played well, I was reliable on the wing, but I was never one of them. Not really. I was the quiet one, the scholarship kid, the one who disappeared the moment practice was over. And from my safe distance, I watched Kian. I cataloged the way his dark hair curled with sweat at his temples, the network of fine lines that fanned from the corners of his eyes when he laughed, the low, rumbling timbre of his voice when he was giving a pre-game speech that made my own insides hum in sympathy. It was a secret, hopeless fascination, a study in a language I would never be brave enough to speak. This particular ache, however, the one humming in me tonight, was different. It was sharper, laced with the bitter tang of triumph. We'd won the championship. The final whistle had been a physical shock, a wave of sound and relief that had sent bodies crashing into one another in a chaotic, joyous pile. I'd been at the bottom of it, the weight of my teammates a crushing, anonymous celebration. For a few seconds, I had felt a part of it. But then the pile had dispersed, and I was on my feet, and the distance had snapped back into place like a rubber band. Now, we were at some off-campus house, the kind with sticky floors and bass that vibrated up through the soles of your shoes. The air was thick with the smell of spilled beer, sweat, and cheap perfume. It was a celebration, a culmination of a year's worth of brutal practices and hard-fought games. Everyone was shouting, laughing, grabbing at each other. And I was standing in a corner, nursing the same warm beer for the last hour, watching Kian. He was holding court, as always, a crooked, easy grin on his face. People orbited him, clapping his shoulder, hanging on his words. He had a way of making everyone feel seen, a brief, intense focus that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. I knew that feeling because I'd been on the receiving end of it a few times. A quick, good run, Leo, or a you with us, during a huddle. Each time, it had felt like a brand, a hot, sharp shock of attention that I would replay in my mind for days. Tonight, though, something was different. I saw it in the moments between his laughs. A flicker of something else in his eyes. A tightness in his jaw that the easy smile didn't quite erase. He looked tired. Not just physically, but something deeper. He deflected a laughing shove from our prop, his smile widening. But his eyes, a deep, unreadable hazel, drifted over the heads of the crowd. They roamed the room, restless, searching, and then they landed on me. It wasn't a casual glance. It was a full stop. For a solid 3 seconds that stretched into an eternity, the noise of the party faded into a dull roar. It was just his gaze, direct and heavy, pinning me to my spot in the corner. My heart, which had been beating a steady, lonely rhythm, kicked into a frantic, panicked gallop. I felt a flush creep up my neck. I was caught in my endless, silent observation. I should have looked away, broken the contact, faded back into the wallpaper where I belonged. But I couldn't. I was trapped in that gaze, in the unasked question that seemed to hang in the space between us. Then, just as quickly as it had started, it was over. Someone else demanded his attention, and he turned away, the connection severed. But the echo of it remained. The air in my corner of the room felt charged, different. He had seen me. Not just glanced over me, but seen me. And in that moment, the familiar ache in my chest sharpened into something new. Something dangerously close to hope. I spent the next hour trying to convince myself I had imagined it. It was the noise, the heat, the single beer making me sentimental. Kian was just scanning the room, making sure his whole team was there, celebrating. That's what a good captain did. It was nothing personal. It was foolish to think otherwise. I was an expert at this kind of internal negotiation, tamping down the wild, illogical leaps of my own heart. I was good at managing my expectations, which were, as a rule, set firmly at 0. But my eyes kept betraying me, straying back to him, and I started to notice things. Small things. He'd be in the middle of a story, his hands moving as he talked, and his gaze would flick to my corner again. A micro-expression lasting less than a second. Or he'd shift his stance, angling his body slightly in my direction, even as he was talking to someone else. It was probably nothing. It was definitely nothing. But the what-if was a persistent, insidious whisper. Then, he started moving. Not towards me, not directly, but with a slow, deliberate casualness that seemed anything but. He navigated the sea of bodies, pausing to clap a shoulder here, to laugh at a joke there. He was a shark moving through water, graceful and purposeful. And his trajectory, I realized with a jolt that made my stomach clench, was bringing him closer. My mind went into overdrive. What do I do? What do I say? He's just getting another drink. He's going to the bathroom. Don't be an idiot, Leo. I took a large, desperate gulp of my warm beer, the taste sour on my tongue. I tried to look casual, to look like I was surveying the party, enjoying the atmosphere, and not at all like a rabbit frozen in the path of an oncoming truck. He stopped a few feet away, leaning against the wall, effectively creating a small pocket of space around us in the heaving mass of the party. He wasn't looking at me, but I felt his presence like a physical heat. The air grew thick, heavy with unspoken things. He took a long drink from his bottle, the muscles in his throat working. I watched the movement, mesmerized. You hiding back here? His voice was low, cutting through the din without any effort. It was directed at me. There was no one else it could have been for. I startled, my head snapping towards him. What? Oh, no. Just taking it all in. My own voice sounded thin, reedy, pathetic. A small smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. Right. Taking it all in, he said it without sarcasm, but with a knowing quality that made me feel entirely transparent. He pushed off the wall and took a step closer. The space between us shrank. I could smell the faint, clean scent of his soap underneath the party stale beer smell. It was grounding, real. You played a hell of a game today, Leo. Thanks. You too. My reply was automatic, a reflex. My brain was too busy processing the fact that Kian Cross was standing in front of me, talking to me, and not about a missed tackle or a strategic play. He nodded, his eyes scanning my face. It felt like he was reading me, seeing past the nervous energy to the lonely ache underneath. You don't like this stuff, do you? He asked, gesturing vaguely at the chaos of the party. I was so taken aback by the directness of the question, by the perception of it, that I answered honestly. Not really. Me neither, he admitted, and the confession hung in the air between us, a small, shared secret. It was a crack in the facade of the perfect team captain, a glimpse of the person underneath. And in that moment, I felt a connection to him that was more real than anything I had experienced on the field. He held my gaze for another long moment. His eyes were intense, searching. Then, he did something that sent a jolt straight through me. He reached out, his movements slow, deliberate. I thought he was going to clap my shoulder, the standard, safe gesture of camaraderie. But he didn't. His hand landed on the small of my back, his fingers pressing gently against my spine. It wasn't a casual touch. It was a claim, a statement. It was firm and warm, and the heat of it spread through my entire body, a wildfire chasing away the chill of my isolation. Come on, he said, his voice a low rumble that I felt more than heard. Let's get some air. He didn't wait for an answer. His hand remained on my back, a steady, guiding pressure as he turned and began to steer me through the crowd. My feet moved on their own accord, my body following his lead as if I were a marionette, and he held the strings. Every point of contact where his fingers pressed into my shirt felt like it was burning a hole right through to my skin. The party swirled around us, a blur of sound and color, but my entire universe had contracted to the 5 points of pressure on my lower back and the man who had put them there. We moved through the house, a silent wake parting the sea of drunken revelers. No one seemed to notice. Or if they did, they saw their captain and the quiet winger and assumed nothing. They couldn't feel the electric current humming between us. They couldn't hear the frantic drumming of my heart. This was happening in a world of our own, invisible to everyone else. He led me through a sliding glass door and onto a dark, quiet patio. The cool night air was a shock after the stifling heat of the house. The roar of the party was muted back here, replaced by the gentle chirping of crickets and the distant hum of traffic. A single, dim porch light cast long shadows across the cracked concrete. He dropped his hand from my back, and I felt the loss of it immediately, a sudden coldness. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly feeling exposed. He walked to the wooden railing and leaned against it, looking out into the dark, overgrown yard. I stood awkwardly a few feet away, unsure of the new rules of this strange, new game we were playing. "Better out here," he said, his voice quiet. He wasn't looking at me, but I knew he was aware of my every movement. "Yeah," I managed to say, my voice still shaky. We stood in silence for a long time. It wasn't an awkward silence, not like the ones I was used to. It was a heavy silence, thick with everything that hadn't been said inside. It stretched and expanded, filling the space between us, making it feel both vast and incredibly intimate. I could hear the sound of his breathing, a slow, steady rhythm in the quiet of the night. I watched his profile, silhouetted against the dim light from the house. The strong line of his jaw, the slight curve of his nose. He looked different out here, away from the demands of his role. The weight he seemed to carry inside was more visible on his shoulders now. The tiredness I'd glimpsed in his eyes was settled deep in his expression. He looked vulnerable, and that vulnerability, more than all his strength and confidence, was what undid me. "Do you ever just want to be anonymous?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The question was so unexpected, so deeply personal, that it took me a moment to process. "All the time," I answered, the words coming out before I had a chance to filter them. It was the truest thing I had ever said to him. He turned his head then, and his eyes found mine in the darkness. There was a flicker of something in them, recognition, empathy, a shared understanding that went beyond words. He saw me. He truly saw me. The lonely kid in the corner, the one who lived his life on the outside looking in. And he wasn't judging me for it. He was one of me. "I knew it," he said softly. "I see the way you watch everything. Like you're not really a part of it. Like you're memorizing it for later." My throat went dry. He had been watching me, too. All those times I thought I was invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of the team, he had been observing me with the same intensity one had been observing him. The realization was staggering. It shifted the very ground beneath my feet. The one-sided fascination I had nurtured in secret for years, maybe it wasn't so one-sided after all. "Sometimes it feels safer that way," I admitted, my voice hoarse. "Safer," he repeated, testing the word. "Maybe. But it's lonely, isn't it?" The direct hit of the question stole the air from my lungs. Lonely. He had named the core of my existence with such simple, devastating accuracy. I could only nod, unable to speak past the lump forming in my throat. He pushed off the railing and took a step towards me, and then another. He stopped when there was barely a foot of space separating us. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. His scent, that clean, soap-and-Kian smell, filled my senses, making me dizzy. "Leo," he said, and the sound of my name on his lips was a revelation. He said it with a softness, an intimacy that no one had ever used before. It sounded like it belonged there. My eyes were locked on his, and in their hazel depths, I saw a storm of emotions that mirrored my own: uncertainty, longing, and a terrifying spark of intention. The world narrowed to this small space on a dark patio, to the charged air between our bodies. The party, the team, the entire universe ceased to exist. There was only him, and me, and the precipice we were standing on. This is it. The thought is a lightning strike. My hands are clammy. My breath catches in my throat. I am acutely aware of every inch of my body, every nerve ending firing in anticipation. He's going to say something, do something, that will change everything. He's going to send me back to my corner, or he's going to pull me into the center of his world. And I have no idea which it will be. Just then, the sliding door burst open, and the illusion was shattered. One of our flankers, Derek stumbled out onto the patio, a bottle of something clear dangling from his hand. He was loud, drunk, and utterly oblivious to the delicate, fragile moment he had just destroyed. "There you are, Cap," he slurred, slinging an arm around Kian's shoulders. "We're doing shots. Some guy just lit his own fart on fire. You're missing everything." Kian didn't flinch. He didn't move. But I saw the shift. The mask of the team captain snapped back into place. The vulnerability in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cool, unreadable hardness. His body, which had been angled towards me, full of open, questioning energy, straightened, closed off. "I'll be there in a minute, Derek," Kian said, his voice flat, devoid of the warmth it had held just seconds before. Derek didn't seem to notice the change in tone. He just laughed, a loud, obnoxious bark. "Don't be too long. And hey, Leo," he gave me a dismissive glance. "You should try smiling sometime. You might like it." He then let out a belch and stumbled back into the house, dragging the noise and the chaos of the party back out with him before the door slid shut again, plunging us back into relative quiet. But the moment was gone. The bubble had burst. The air between us was no longer charged with possibility. It was thick with awkwardness. The silence that had felt intimate before now felt like a chasm. I felt myself retreating, pulling back into the safety of my shell. The hope that had flared so brightly in my chest was flickering, dying. "I should probably go," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I couldn't look at him. I stared at a crack in the concrete, focusing on its jagged lines. It felt like a map of my own fractured heart. "Leo," he said my name again, but this time it was sharp, a command. I forced myself to look up. His face was a thundercloud. A muscle in his jaw was twitching, and his eyes were dark with an emotion I couldn't decipher. It looked like anger. My stomach plummeted. Of course. He was angry. Angry at Derek for interrupting, or worse, angry at himself for whatever moment of weakness had led him to seek me out, to speak to me with such intimacy. He regretted it. The thought was a cold, sharp knife in my gut. "What Derek said," he started, his voice low and tight. "It's fine." I cut in quickly, desperate to end this. "He's drunk." "I don't care." "I do," Kian said, and the intensity in his voice made me freeze. That's the kind of casual cruelty that festers. People saying stupid shit without thinking about who it might hurt. He took a step closer, erasing the distance Derek had created between us. "He had no right to talk to you like that." I was speechless. He wasn't angry at me. He was angry for me. He was being protective. The idea was so foreign, so overwhelming, that I couldn't form a response. Before I could find my voice, another interruption came. This time, it was a different kind of sound. A loud crash from inside, followed by a chorus of shouts and the distinct sound of glass shattering. It was a sound that signaled the party had reached its inevitable, destructive climax. Kian let out a harsh sigh, running a hand through his hair in frustration. The captain was needed. His moment of quiet rebellion was over. "God damn it," he muttered under his breath. He looked from the door back to me, and his expression was one of profound, soul-deep frustration. It was the look of a man being pulled in two different directions. "You should go," I said, my voice flat. I was giving him an out. "They need you." He looked at me, his eyes searching my face again. "This isn't over," he said, and it wasn't a promise. It was a vow. The intensity was back, a burning focus that made my skin tingle. He held my gaze for one more heartbeat, a silent communication passing between us that I was too overwhelmed to decipher. Then he turned and walked back into the house, back into the chaos, back to his team. He didn't look back. The glass door slid shut behind him, and I was left alone in the dark, my heart hammering against my ribs, his 3 words echoing in the sudden, profound silence. "This isn't over." I didn't go back inside. I couldn't. The thought of facing that crowd, of pretending like my entire world hadn't just been tilted on its axis, was impossible. I stayed on the patio for a few more minutes, the cool air doing little to calm the fire in my veins. Then I slipped around the side of the house, a shadow moving through the darkness, and I walked home. The walk was a blur. My mind was a whirlwind of replays and analysis. Every word he'd said, every glance, every micro-expression. The warmth of his hand on my back was a phantom sensation I could still feel. The low timbre of his voice saying my name echoed in my ears. I dissected the moment, turning it over and over, searching for flaws, for signs I had misinterpreted everything. It was my defense mechanism, my way of protecting myself from disappointment. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, to dismiss it as a strange, fleeting impulse on his part, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between us. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay in my narrow dorm bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, my body humming with a nervous energy that was equal parts terror and exhilaration. Kian Cross, the untouchable center of my universe, had seen me. He had spoken to me not as a teammate, but as a person. He had shared a moment of vulnerability. He had defended me, and he had promised something. This isn't over. What did it mean? Was it a threat? A promise? An acknowledgement of the tension that had been simmering between us for so long. The next day was a Sunday, a day of rest and recovery. There was no practice, no team meeting. I spent the day in the library, trying to lose myself in textbooks, but the words swam in front of my eyes, meaningless symbols. My focus was shot. My thoughts kept drifting back to the party, to the darkness of the patio, to the look in Kian's eyes. I jumped every time my phone buzzed, my heart leaping into my throat, only to be disappointed by a notification from a news app or a message from my mom. I didn't know what I was hoping for. A text? A call? It seemed absurd, impossible. By Monday, I had managed to convince myself that I had blown the entire thing out of proportion. It was a weird night. We'd won a championship. Emotions were running high. Kian had had a few beers. He was probably just being a good captain, making sure the quiet, awkward guy on the team felt included. The protective anger was just part of his nature. The final, intense promise was just a strange turn of phrase. I was a fool for reading anything more into it. I walked into the locker room that afternoon with a sense of dread, my armor of feigned indifference firmly in place. I expected things to be back to normal. I would be invisible again, and Kian would be the captain, distant and unattainable. That was the natural order of things. Anything else was a dangerous fantasy. The atmosphere was subdued, the usual boisterous energy replaced by a collective, groaning hangover. I found my locker, keeping my eyes down, and started to change. I could feel the moment Kian walked in without even looking. The energy in the room shifted, a subtle realignment, as everyone unconsciously oriented themselves towards him. I braced myself, waiting for the inevitable return to the status quo. I heard him moving through the room, his voice a low murmur as he exchanged words with a few of the guys. I kept my back to him, focusing on lacing my boots, my fingers clumsy. I felt a presence stop behind me. My whole body went rigid. Leo, it was him. His voice was quiet, for my ears only. My heart did a painful lurch. I finished tying my boot and slowly, reluctantly, turned around. He was leaning against the locker next to mine, arms crossed over his chest. He was already in his practice gear, and his expression was serious, unreadable. The rest of the team was a noisy blur in the background, but we were in that bubble again, that pocket of intense, focused silence. Hey, I managed, my voice rough. He didn't waste time with small talk. You left the other night. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Yeah, I was tired. The lie was thin, unconvincing even to my own ears. He just looked at me, his hazel eyes seeming to see right through the flimsy excuse. He didn't call me on it. He didn't have to. I looked for you, he said simply. The 3 words landed like stones in the pit of my stomach. I looked for you. The implications were staggering. He had gone back to the party, dealt with the chaos, and then he had come looking for me. The quiet kid from the corner. The one no one ever looked for. Oh, was all I could say. My brain felt like it had short-circuited. He pushed off the locker, his movement fluid and decisive. Walk with me, he said, already turning towards the door that led to the field. Again, it wasn't a request. It was an expectation. He expected me to follow. And I did. I fell into step beside him, my mind reeling. We walked out of the noisy locker room and into the bright, cold afternoon air. The field was empty, the stand silent. It was just the two of us, walking across the perfectly manicured grass, the rhythmic crunch of our cleats the only sound. I meant what I said, he began, his eyes fixed on the distant goalpost. About it not being over. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly tight. What did you mean? I had to ask. I had to know. The uncertainty was eating me alive. He stopped walking and turned to face me. The sun was behind him, casting his face in shadow, making him impossible to read. I meant, he said, his voice low and steady, that I'm tired of pretending. Pretending. The word came out as a squeak. Pretending I don't notice you. Pretending I don't see you watching me from across the room. Pretending my heart doesn't beat a little faster when you're on the field and you make a clean tackle. He took a step closer, and the space between us crackled with energy. Pretending I haven't wanted to have a real conversation with you all season, but not knowing how to get past. All this, he gestured vaguely at the empty stadium around us, at the world of jocks and expectations that defined our lives. I was drowning. His words were a tidal wave, pulling me under. Every secret hope I had ever harbored, every fantasy I had brutally suppressed, was being laid bare in the harsh afternoon light. He saw it. He knew. And he felt it too. I don't know what to say. I stammered, my carefully constructed walls crumbling into dust. You don't have to say anything, he said, his voice softening. He reached out, not with the confident claim of his hand on my back, but with a hesitant, questioning touch. His fingers brushed against my arm, a feather-like contact that sent shivers down my spine. Just don't run away this time. The rest of practice was a surreal experience. I moved on autopilot, my body going through the motions of drills and sprints, but my mind was elsewhere. It was fixed on Kian. He treated me no differently in front of the team. He was still the captain, shouting orders, offering critiques, his focus on the game. But I felt the change. I felt his eyes on me when he thought no one was looking. During a water break, he walked past me and his shoulder brushed mine, a deliberate, lingering contact that was for me and me alone. The world had split into two versions. The public one, where everything was the same, and the private one, where everything was different. And I was living in both at once. After practice, back in the chaos of the locker room, I was terrified that the bubble would pop again, that the fragile, new reality would dissipate. I packed my bag quickly, eager to escape before I could be disappointed. Leo. His voice stopped me in my tracks, my hand on the door. I turned. He was standing by his locker, pulling a clean shirt over his head. For a moment, I was treated to the sight of his bare torso, the defined muscles of his back and shoulders, the result of years of grueling work. My mouth went dry. He caught me looking, and a slow, knowing smile spread across his face. It was the first time I had seen him smile like that, a genuine, slightly wicked grin that was devastatingly attractive. My car's in the north lot, he said, his tone casual, as if he were commenting on the weather. The black Jeep. I'll meet you there in 10-inch. And then he turned back to his locker, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't a question. It was a plan. An instruction. He was taking control, making the decisions, pulling me out of my passive existence and into a future he was actively creating for us. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't scared. I was terrified, yes, but underneath the terror was a thrilling, unfamiliar current of excitement. I was letting someone else take the lead. I was letting Kian take the lead. And it felt, impossibly, like coming home. The 10 minutes I waited felt like 10 years. I sat on a concrete bench in the near-empty parking lot, my gym bag clutched in my lap like a shield. My mind raced with 1,000 possibilities. Where were we going? What would we talk about? What did he want from me? Was this a date? The word itself felt foreign, alien, something that belonged to other people's lives. When his black Jeep pulled up, the engine a low, confident rumble, my anxiety spiked. He leaned over and pushed the passenger door open from the inside. Get in, he said, his voice easy. I slid into the passenger seat, the interior of the Jeep clean and smelling faintly of leather and something else, something that was just him. It was an intimate space, a bubble that separated us from the outside world. He put the car in drive and pulled out of the parking lot. Where are we going? I asked, my voice barely audible over the sound of the engine. Somewhere we can talk, he said, his eyes on the road. Without an audience. The silence in the car was comfortable, not strained like it had been on the patio. It felt companionable. I risked a glance at him. His profile was strong, his hands resting easily on the steering wheel. He seemed completely at ease, as if driving away from campus with me was the most natural thing in the world. For me, It felt like I had stepped through a portal into an alternate reality. He drove for about 20 minutes, leaving the university town behind and heading out towards the hills that bordered the city. The landscape changed from concrete and traffic lights to winding roads and tall trees. Finally, he turned onto a narrow, unmarked gravel road and followed it for another few hundred yards until it opened into a small clearing. He parked the Jeep at a scenic overlook, a place that offered a panoramic view of the entire city sparkling below as dusk began to settle. He cut the engine, and the sudden silence was profound. The only sound was the wind whispering through the tall pines. "I come here sometimes," he said, his voice soft, "when the noise gets to be too much." It was another confession, another piece of himself he was offering me. The team captain, the leader, the center of attention, needed to escape the noise. It was a vulnerability that resonated deep within me. We sat there for a long time, just watching the lights of the city begin to twinkle on one by one as the sky deepened from orange to indigo. He didn't press me to talk. He just let us be, together, in the quiet. It was the most peaceful I had felt in years. The constant, low-grade anxiety that was the background music of my life had faded, replaced by a sense of calm, a feeling of being exactly where I was supposed to be. "So," he said finally, turning in his seat to face me more directly. "You, me?" I asked, a nervous laugh escaping me. "Yeah, you. I feel like I know every stupid detail about half the guys on the team. I know their girlfriend drama, what they drink on weekends, their favorite stupid movies. But you're a ghost, Leo. I know you're a literature major and you're fast as hell on the wing." That's it. The way he said it wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of curiosity. He wanted to know me. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. To be known was to be seen, and to be seen was to be vulnerable. "There's not much to know," I said, defaulting to my usual self-deprecation. "I don't believe that," he said immediately, his gaze unwavering. "Nobody is not much to know." His simple, profound statement chipped away another piece of my armor. He was refusing to let me hide. He was demanding that I be real. So, hesitantly at first, and then with more confidence as he listened with quiet, focused attention, I started to talk. I told him about growing up in a small town, about the scholarship being my only way out. I told him about my love of old books, the way I felt more at home in the quiet stacks of the library than anywhere else. I didn't tell him the biggest secret, the one that defined so much of my loneliness, but I felt like I was telling him everything else. And he listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't judge. He just watched my face in the dim light of the dashboard, his expression thoughtful, and nodded occasionally, encouraging me to continue. When I finally ran out of words, a shy, embarrassed silence fell. "See," he said softly, "there's a lot to know." He reached across the center console, his hand covering mine where it rested on my thigh. His touch was warm and firm, a silent anchor. "Thank you for telling me." My heart was doing a slow, powerful drumbeat in my chest. His thumb began to move, tracing small, absent-minded circles on the back of my hand. Every tiny movement sent a jolt of electricity through my system. This was real. This was happening. "My turn, I guess," he said, a wry smile on his face. And he started to talk. He told me about the pressure of being the captain, the weight of everyone's expectations. He talked about his father, a former pro player, and the long shadow that cast over his life. He talked about feeling like he was always playing a part, the one everyone needed him to be, and how exhausting it was. He was giving me the pieces of himself that he kept hidden from the rest of the world. He was trading his vulnerability for mine. As he spoke, the last of my fear melted away. This wasn't some fleeting curiosity. This was a connection, a deep, resonant understanding between two people who, on the surface, were complete opposites, but who underneath it all, were just two lonely souls searching for a quiet place to land. The sky was completely dark now, a blanket of stars spread out above us. The city below was a river of light. Inside the Jeep, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken emotions, with the gravity of the confessions we had shared. His hand was still on mine, his thumb still tracing lazy circles. He stopped talking, and the silence that fell was different again. It was charged, electric, humming with a new kind of tension. It wasn't the tension of uncertainty anymore. It was the tension of inevitability. He turned his body more fully towards me, his other hand coming up to rest on the back of my seat, effectively caging me in. His face was close, so close I could see the flecks of green in his hazel eyes, could feel the warmth of his breath on my cheek. "Leo," he whispered, and my name was a prayer on his lips. My breath hitched. This is it. This is the moment. My eyes flickered down to his mouth, and then back up to his eyes. It was all the permission he needed. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. But I was frozen, not with fear, but with a desperate, all-consuming want. I didn't move. I couldn't. I had been waiting for this moment my entire life, even before I knew it was him I was waiting for. And then his lips met mine. It wasn't a hard, demanding kiss. It was soft, questioning, a gentle exploration. It was tentative at first, as if he was afraid of scaring me off. But then I leaned into it, a silent surrender, and something shifted. A low groan rumbled in his chest, and his hand moved from the back of my seat to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, holding me in place. The kiss deepened, becoming more confident, more hungry. It was everything. It was the relief of 1,000 unspoken words, the release of years of pent-up longing. It was the taste of him, the feel of his slight stubble against my skin, the solid presence of his body so close to mine. My hand, the one not trapped beneath his, came up to rest on his chest, my fingers curling into the soft fabric of his shirt, feeling the steady, powerful beat of his heart underneath. It was perfect. It was right. It felt like I had been holding my breath for years, and I could finally exhale. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. His thumb stroked the sensitive skin behind my ear. "Been wanting to do that for a long time," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Me too," I whispered, the confession feeling like the most natural thing in the world. A slow smile spread across his face. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his eyes soft and full of a warmth that made my insides melt. "So what now?" he asked. "I have no idea," I admitted honestly. I had never gotten this far, not even in my wildest dreams. "Good," he said, his smile widening. "Then we can figure it out together." And in that moment, looking at him, with the city lights spread out below us like a blanket of fallen stars, I believed him. The ache in my chest, the familiar companion of my loneliness, was gone. In its place was a feeling so new, so bright, and overwhelming. I didn't even have a name for it. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I never wanted it to go away. The drive back to campus was a quiet dream. Kian's hand found mine over the center console and didn't let go, his thumb rubbing gentle patterns over my knuckles. I watched the dark road unwind before us, the headlights cutting a path through the night, and felt a sense of peace that was entirely alien to me. The world outside the windows of the Jeep felt distant, unimportant. My reality was here, in this small, warm space, with his hand holding mine. He didn't take me back to my dorm. He drove straight to his off-campus apartment, a small, neat place in a quiet building far from the undergraduate chaos. He parked the car and turned to me, his expression questioning. "Is this okay?" I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. It was more than okay. It was what I wanted, even if I hadn't been brave enough to admit it to myself. His apartment was simple, sparsely decorated, but clean. It smelled like him. I stood awkwardly in the middle of the living room as he moved around, turning on a single lamp that cast a soft, golden glow over the room. He took my gym bag from my shoulder and set it by the door, a simple gesture of welcome that felt monumental. "Do you want a drink?" "Water," he asked, his voice a little strained. The confidence he projected on the field and in the car had been replaced by a slight nervousness that was incredibly endearing. He was out of his depth, too. We both were. "Water's fine," I said. While he was in the kitchen, I let my eyes drift around the room. There were a few framed photos on a bookshelf. One was of him and his parents, all of them smiling stiffly. Another was a team photo from high school. And then there was one that made my heart stop. It was a candid shot from one of our games this season. It was a picture of me, mid-stride, running for the try line, my face a mask of fierce concentration. It was a professional-looking shot, not a casual snapshot. Why would he have a framed picture of me? He came back into the room with 2 glasses of water and saw what I was looking at. A faint flush crept up his neck. "My dad comes to some of the games," he said, by way of explanation. He's a photographer. He said it was a good action shot. The excuse was paper thin. His father might have taken the picture, but Kian was the one who had framed it and put it on his shelf. He had a picture of me in his home. The implications of that were almost too much to process. He handed me a glass, our fingers brushing. The small contact was enough to send a fresh jolt of electricity through me. We stood there in the quiet living room, the silent stretching, filled with a nervous, hopeful energy. "So," I said, breaking the silence. "A ghost, huh?" He had the grace to look a little embarrassed. "Well, you were," he said with a small smile. "Not anymore." He took a step closer, setting his glass down on the coffee table. He reached out and took my glass, setting it down beside his. Then his hands came up to cup my face, his palms warm against my skin. His thumbs gently stroked my cheekbones. "Definitely not a ghost," he whispered, his eyes searching mine. And he kissed me again. This time, there was no hesitation. It was a kiss of confirmation, of certainty. It was deep and slow and breathtaking. My hands came up to rest on his waist, holding on to him as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning world. He backed me up slowly until my legs hit the edge of the sofa, and we tumbled onto it, a tangle of limbs and breathless sighs. This was new territory, and it was terrifying. All my life, intimacy had been something I'd read about in books, something I'd yearned for from a safe distance. Now it was real, it was here, and it was him. A wave of insecurity washed over me. I was inexperienced, awkward. He was Kian Cross. He could have anyone. What was he doing with me? As if he could read my mind, he pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against mine. "Hey," he said softly. "Look at me." I opened my eyes. He was watching me with an expression of such tenderness it made my heart ache. "It's just me," he said. "It's just us. Whatever you're thinking, just let it go." "Okay." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. He understood. He saw my fear, and he wasn't running from it. He was meeting me there. That night, we didn't do much more than kiss and hold each other. We lay on his sofa, fully clothed, my head on his chest, his arms wrapped securely around me. I listened to the steady, reassuring beat of his heart under my ear. He ran his fingers through my hair, his touch gentle, soothing. We talked in low murmurs, sharing small stories and secrets in the darkness. It was more intimate than anything I could have ever imagined. It wasn't about sex. It was about connection. It was about finally, after a lifetime of feeling alone, not being alone anymore. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, I was blinking against the soft gray light of dawn filtering through the window. I was still on the sofa, but Kian had covered us both with a thick blanket. He was awake, his head propped up on his hand, just watching me. The morning after panic I had always read about tried to take hold. The fear that the magic of the night would dissolve in the harsh light of day. But then Kian smiled, a slow, sleepy smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Morning," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning," I whispered back. He leaned in and gave me a soft, chaste kiss. "I could get used to this," he said. And just like that, the fear vanished, replaced by a warm, glowing certainty. This was real. This wasn't a dream. The next few weeks were a strange, secret dream. In public, at practice, in the locker room, we were the same. We were Kian, the captain, and Leo, the quiet winger. We maintained a careful distance, communicating with stolen glances and brief, seemingly accidental touches that no one else would notice, but that sent lightning through my veins. The secrecy was a necessity. We both knew the team wasn't the most enlightened group of men. A revelation like ours could fracture everything, and neither of us was ready for that. But in private, in the sanctuary of his apartment, we were just Kian and Leo. We fell into a routine that felt both new and incredibly natural. I'd go to his place after practice, and we'd study together, or make dinner, or just lie on the sofa and talk for hours. I was discovering the man behind the myth. I learned that he was a terrible cook, but made a perfect cup of coffee. I learned that he loved old, black and white movies. I learned that he had a quiet, dry wit that only came out when he felt comfortable. And he was learning me. He drew me out of my shell in a way no one else ever had. He'd ask me questions about the books I was reading and actually listen to the answers. He encouraged my writing, reading the short stories I had been too shy to show anyone else and telling me they were good. He saw the person I kept hidden from the world, and he liked that person. He loved that person. He never said the words. Neither did I. It was too soon, too new, too fragile. But the feeling was there, a powerful, unspoken current that flowed between us. It was in the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching. It was in the way my name sounded when he said it. It was in the comfortable silences that we could share without any need to fill them. But the real world couldn't be kept at bay forever. The end of the semester was approaching, and with it, the end of the season. The team banquet was the final hurdle, the last official gathering before we all scattered for the summer. The thought of it filled me with a low-level dread. It would be another party, another performance. And this time, pretending would be so much harder. The banquet was held in a rented hall, a slightly more formal affair than the house party, but with the same underlying current of forced jock camaraderie. We were all supposed to wear shirts and ties. I stood in front of the mirror in Kian's bathroom, fumbling with the knot of my tie. I was terrible at it. It always came out lopsided and sad-looking. I heard him come up behind me. I saw his reflection in the mirror, standing close, his presence a familiar, comforting warmth. He didn't say anything. He just reached around me, his hands covering mine, and expertly undid the mangled knot. Then, his fingers brushed mine as he took the two ends of the silk and began to tie it for me. His arms were around me, caging me against the counter. His chest was pressed against my back. I could feel the warmth of his body, smell his clean, familiar scent. I watched his hands in the mirror as they moved with a deft, practiced ease. It was an incredibly domestic, intimate moment. "There," he said softly, his voice a low rumble by my ear as he tightened the knot perfectly. His hands dropped from the tie to rest on my hips, and he rested his chin on my shoulder, his cheek brushing against mine. We looked at our reflections in the mirror. Two men, one in the other's arms. It looked so right. "I don't want to go," I confessed, my voice a whisper. "I know," he said, his arms tightening around me. "Me neither. But we have to. It's the last thing. After tonight, we're free. The word was a promise. A promise of a future, of a summer, of something that existed beyond the confines of the team and the university. The banquet was as awful as I had expected. There were long, boring speeches from the coaches and the athletic director. There was mediocre food and endless backslapping. Kian, as captain, had to sit at the head table. I was at a table in the back with some of the other underclassmen. The distance between us felt like a physical chasm. I watched him, making his captain's speech, charming and confident, and felt a pang of something that felt dangerously like jealousy. Not of the people around him, but of the role he had to play, the mask he had to wear that kept him from me. After the official proceedings were over, the bar opened, and the atmosphere grew louder, more chaotic. I retreated to my usual spot at the edge of the room, nursing a glass of water, feeling the familiar loneliness creep back in. It was different now, though. It wasn't a permanent state of being. It was a temporary condition, a waiting game. I was watching Kian, who was trapped in a conversation with the head coach, when Derek, the same flanker from the party, sidled up to me. He was already several drinks in, his eyes glassy. "Leo," he said, his voice overly loud. Still not smiling, I see. I just gave him a flat look, not rising to the bait. "You know," he said, leaning in conspiratorially, his breath sour with alcohol. "I see you. And the captain. See you two talking all the time. Real quiet like. Got a little secret, do you?" My blood ran cold. He was fishing, drunk and stupid, but the words hit their mark. My heart started to pound. Had people noticed? Were we not as careful as we thought? "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice tight. "Oh, I think you do," he sneered. "Always knew there was something a little off about you." Before I could respond, before the full weight of his ugly insinuation could even land, a hand clamped down on Derek's shoulder. It was Kian. I hadn't even seen him approach. His face was like stone, his eyes chips of ice. The easygoing captain was gone, replaced by someone cold and dangerous. "Derek," Kian said, his voice dangerously low, "I think you've had enough to drink. Why don't you go find your ride home?" Derek, for all his drunken bravado, seemed to shrink under Kian's gaze. He stammered something, trying to pull away, but Kian's grip was like iron. I said, "Go home," Kian repeated, his voice dropping even lower, each word laced with menace. He gave Derek a small, forceful shove in the direction of the door. Derek stumbled, shot me a look of pure venom, and then scurried away, disappearing into the crowd. Kian turned to me. The anger was still radiating off him in waves. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice tight. I nodded, though I was shaking. He didn't. He doesn't know anything. He was just being an ass. "It doesn't matter," Kian said, his jaw clenched. "I'm done with this. I'm done hiding." He grabbed my hand. Not a subtle, brushing touch, but a firm, possessive grip, lacing his fingers through mine. It was a public, undeniable declaration. My eyes went wide. People were looking. I saw a few of our teammates turn their heads, their eyes widening in surprise. I could hear the whispers starting. "Kian, what are you doing?" I hissed, trying to pull my hand away. "I'm done pretending," he said, his eyes boring into mine, full of a fierce, protective fire. "Let's get out of here." And without another word, he turned and pulled me through the crowded room. He didn't look at anyone. He just forged a path, his shoulders set, his grip on my hand unbreakable. We were a spectacle. The whispers followed us, a rising tide of speculation and shock. But Kian didn't slow down. He pulled me out of the hall, through the lobby, and out into the cool night air. He didn't stop until we were in the parking lot, standing by his Jeep. He finally let go of my hand and leaned against the side of the car, breathing heavily, the anger slowly draining from his face, leaving him looking exhausted. "I'm sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have done that. I should have talked to you first." "No," I said, my voice shaking, but not with fear. With something else. "Oh, don't be sorry." I stepped towards him, into his space, and framed his face with my hands, just as he had done to me in his apartment. "Look at me," I said, echoing his own words back to him. He met my gaze. His eyes were uncertain, vulnerable. "I'm not scared," I said, and I was surprised to find that it was true. The fear of being seen, of being known, had been replaced by a fierce pride. "I'm done hiding, too." A slow, beautiful smile spread across his face, a smile of pure, unadulterated relief. Yeah, I said. And then I kissed him, right there in the middle of the parking lot, under the harsh orange glow of the streetlights. It wasn't a gentle, questioning kiss. It was a kiss of certainty, of ownership. It was a kiss that said, "You are mine, and I am yours, and I don't care who knows it." When we broke apart, he was laughing, a real, joyful sound. He pulled me into a hug, lifting me off my feet and spinning me around. I laughed with him, a sound of pure, uninhibited happiness that I didn't even recognize as my own. He set me back on my feet, but didn't let me go. He held me close, his arms wrapped around me, my face buried in the crook of his neck. "So what now?" I whispered against his skin. "Now," he said, his voice full of a happy, confident certainty, "we go home." And we did. We drove back to his apartment, the windows down, the cool night air rushing in. We didn't talk about the team, or the banquet, or what would happen tomorrow. We were in a new world now, one of our own making. That night, in the safety of his bed, we finally made love. It was slow, and gentle, and perfect. It was a physical manifestation of the emotional intimacy we had already built. It was a conversation spoken in a language of touch and breath and sighs. It was the final, absolute removal of the distance between us. Afterwards, we lay tangled together in the darkness, our bodies still humming. I traced the line of his jaw with my finger, memorizing the feel of him. "I love you," I whispered into the quiet of the room. The words had been sitting on my heart for so long, and they finally felt safe to say. He went very still. Then he shifted, pulling me closer, until my head was resting on his chest, right over his heart. I could feel the frantic, powerful rhythm of it. "I love you too, Leo," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that made my own eyes burn with tears. "God, I love you so much." We didn't talk much more after that. There was nothing left to say. We just held each other, drifting off to sleep in the secure, absolute knowledge that we had found our way home. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. I found Kian in the kitchen, wearing nothing but a pair of sweatpants, humming softly to himself as he poured 2 mugs. He looked up when I came in, and his face broke into a smile that was so full of love and happiness it stole my breath away. "Morning," he said, his voice warm and easy. He handed me a mug. Our fingers touched. The familiar spark was still there, But it was different now. It was a comfortable, steady warmth, not a frightening jolt. We stood by the window, sipping our coffee, watching the morning light spill over the city. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from one of the guys on the team. Then another, and another. The real world was knocking. I felt a flicker of the old anxiety. Kian must have seen it on my face. He put his mug down and took mine, placing them both on the counter. Then he took my hands in his. "Hey," he said, his voice firm, drawing my attention back to him. "We'll figure it out. Together. Okay." I looked into his steady, confident eyes, and I knew he was right. We would. Whatever came next, gossip, judgment, acceptance, we would face it together. The lonely, invisible boy who used to watch the world from the sidelines was gone. In his place was a man who was loved, and who loved in return. The ache in my chest, the hollowness that had been my constant companion for so long, was well and truly gone. It had been filled to the brim with something warm and bright, and impossibly, wonderfully real. It had been filled with him. I leaned in and kissed him, a slow, lazy morning kiss that tasted of coffee and a brand new beginning. And for the first time in my entire life, I felt completely, utterly whole.